This is Joe Banye for FastPitchPower.com and Empower Athletic Development. In today's video, I'm going to give you a brief tutorial on how I coach medicine ball exercises to improve rotational power for athletes such as softball and baseball athletes. I really use a small catalog of exercises, and I'm going to demonstrate those, explain the sport-specific indications of each, and then also the skill-specific contraindications and consequences of each exercise if done inappropriately. And by inappropriate, I mean with either improper technique or too often in some cases. The first position we start in to improve rotational power is on two knees. And in this position, what this position is going to do is going to allow us to really focus on movement and contribution of the hips into a rotational movement. That's really the biggest thing I see with young athletes, especially young female athletes, is lack of contribution and understanding how much the legs and lower body contribute to rotational movements such as hitting and throwing. It's an old school adage that we throw when we hit with our hips, but getting a young athlete to understand that and to believe in it and to feel it is difficult. It's really difficult in a sports or a skill-specific environment such as a hitting or pitching lesson, but when we add a little bit of weight or a little bit of resistance, you can see the difference when we're focusing on our hips versus upper body movement. So the first position, this kneeling position, is really going to allow us to isolate and focus on movement of the hips. We are in the gym, we are isolating capacities as best we can. With medicine balls, it's very easy to get too close to sport specificity, which is sometimes thought of as a good thing, but in reality, it's not. I've learned that the closer you get to approaching a sport-specific movement with any type of resistance, the worse technique gets, and the more the athlete is allowed to reinforce negative technical habits. Okay? With resistance and with load, we can expose where they're weak. With the lighter load we use and the more sport-specific we get, the more they're able to compensate and to really mask their inefficiencies in what appears to be a sport-specific movement. So with these progressions, we're really trying to stay behind that line of sport specificity and stick to our guns and our principles that we're going to focus on a capacity that's been identified or exposed as weak, or we know that the athlete lacks. We're going to reinforce that, and hopefully through the combination of strength, this transitional type strength training, and then skill training, we blend those enhanced capacities into sport-specific movement. Getting back to this first position, on our knees, what we're working on here is contribution of our hips and lower body into an otherwise rotational movement. With the medicine ball, I start with it in my back pocket. I think about exploding my hips off my heels, like I get a shock off my heels, my hips explode, okay, then the ball explodes out of my back pocket. I don't even think about using my upper body. I want the hips to jump off my heels, and I want the ball to explode out of my back pocket. Okay, so this is our first progression in building rotational power with through utilization of our lower body. Hips back, hands back, explode the hips, fire the ball into the wall. Of course, I'm using my upper body, but the emphasis is on this back lower quarter here. The teamwork between the abs and that back hip, exploding the ball out of the back pocket. Hips back, hands back, explode and finish tall. And get the hips all the way through as best as possible. Okay. One technical error I see is that the athlete needs to understand, even in a kneeling position, that there is some linear movement into the wall. There is a shift from the back hip to the front hip, or the back leg to the lead leg. First of all, if the athlete's doing this correctly, leave it alone. Don't correct it. Don't talk about these technical issues. All right, but if you see the athlete extending their hips too much forward, coming out and around, we've already begun to reinforce bad sport skill habits. Okay, whether it's hitting or softball pitching, I can't get this back shoulder coming around too early before my hips complete their extension. The sequence and the timing between the legs, the upper body, and the hands is really everything to a rotational athlete, regardless if it's hitting, windmill pitching, the golf swing. That's really everything. That's what we're working on. So if you see good sequencing and good timing, don't mess with it. But if you see extension of the hips forward, while it appears that the back shoulder comes around, the ball gets away from my body, and the end exercise looks like this. You can see that my upper body is out in front of my hips. This is already starting to reinforce some bad technical habits that you'll see later on in a sport-specific movement. Okay, so the hips have to lead. Okay, the ball explodes out of the back pocket. Another simple cue you can use is that ball has to travel in a straight line into the wall. Don't let it get out away from the body and into the wall this way. The hands and ball stay in your back pocket. They explode in a straight line into the wall. But the emphasis is on contribution from the hips. That's the first step into improving rotational power.